Hi there guys, and welcome to this retrospective of the original Flintstones series. This is such an iconic show, which laid the way for many cartoons to come after it. The Simpsons, Family Guy, and many more take some form of inspiration from the Flintstones. As far as myself and my history with this show, I know it quite well. I watched a lot of it when I was younger, so we have a lot to talk about here. Of all shows though, I think the Flintstones deserves a deep dive. If you enjoy this video and videos like this, then please show both this video and the channel some love and support, and I will be happy to make more content like this in the future. To start off, I want to touch a bit on the creators and the voice actors behind the show, because more than most shows, I think they were a big part about what made this show great. William Hanna and Joseph Barbera created the show for Hanna-Barbera Productions, and they clearly had great passion for the show as they continued to work on it for its duration. Joseph Barbera himself remained the director for the show's whole run. That run, by the way, was from September 30th, 1960 to April 1st, 1966 on the ABC network. It was 6 seasons consisting of 166 episodes. At the time, that was a massive deal, so much so that it actually held the record for number of episodes produced for a prime-time animated series, until The Simpsons beat it in 1997. Going back to the origins once again, there was an original pilot episode produced for the show in 1959, although it never aired on TV. The main difference was that the show was originally called The Flagstones, and that Dawes Butler did the voice for Fred. He was of course replaced by Alan Reed for the main series, and Reed, along with Gene Vanderpyle, Bea Benaderet, and Mel Blanc, made up the main cast. And Dawes Butler was a great voice actor in his own right, of course, but it was absolutely the right choice to cast Alan Reed as Fred. His performance was one of the best ever for a cartoon character, in my opinion. It was originally meant to be a Jackie Gleason impression from The Honeymooners, but Reed put his own spin on the role, and really made the character stand on its own merit. He has such a loud, commanding voice, which suits Fred and the over-the-top situations he gets into, but he can also sound sheepish and insecure at times, which is so fitting, given that Fred is not the big hard man he makes himself out to be. Even Fred's famous catchphrase, was apparently ad-libbed by Reed during a recording session. It was originally just meant to be Yahoo, so that's an iconic contribution right there. It was just clear to see, in general, that the cast had great fun making the show, and the chemistry they had was so important, given that The Flintstones was a show which relied so heavily on the 4 main characters, and the interactions between them. The only other bit of information which I feel is important to share is that Dawes Butler briefly took over voicing Barney from Mel Blanc, after Mel suffered a serious car accident. Mel was back far quicker than expected though, even voicing the character from his bed during his recovery. You really have to give the guy credit for his dedication. I guess he is the legend of voice acting for a good reason. John Stevenson also deserves a shout out for voicing Fred's boss, Mr. Slate, as well as a few background characters. Right, I'm finally ready to talk about the show. So let's start with its pilot episode, The Flintstone Flyer. It was the type of story that is typical of the Flintstones, which I guess makes it a perfect pilot, right? Unfortunately though, Fred is not a very good pilot, as he tries to take all the credit for Barney's work, while being completely unaware of how the contraption even works, let alone how to fly it. Fred's get-rich-quick schemes are a common theme on the show, and he usually manages to rope Barney in on them, one way or another. The scenes of them using the flying machine to go and play bowling, while Betty and Wilma are out, was great. However, as shown by that clip, they have to beat them back home. Fred and Barney getting into trouble with their wives is definitely the most common source of conflict in the show, and due to their incompetence, they almost always get found out in the end. And the first episode had probably the most harsh example of that, as they literally get beaten up by them. I mean, domestic violence much? That aside, I think it does speak to how in tune the writers were with the characters, and how they should behave. I think a great example of this is the episode The Split Personality. Even though it was only the 5th episode of the series, they already had the confidence to play around with Fred's character, and have him change into someone new. The fact that Fred's personality was so strong that they could trust the audience to recognize the subtleties of it after only a few episodes was pretty amazing actually. I mean, think about it. Most other shows are still trying to figure out their characters during the first season, but not the Flintstones. It knew right away what it was, and due to that, the first season was excellent. Seasons 1 and 2 were the prime of the show, at least in my opinion. After that, it tailed off slightly, which I will cover in more detail later on. For now though, I want to get back to a more positive note, and talk about some of my favourite things about the show. The world building on show here was quite special, especially for the time. I mean, even people who are not interested in cartoons are aware of the Stone Age setting of this show. The intro is obviously iconic, even though, ironically, the one known so well today did not actually debut until season 3. The first 2 seasons had a much more simple and mundane intro, with of course Fred getting locked out of his house in the outro. To complement the Stone Age setting is the use of animals as modern technology, for example using a bird's beak as a sewing machine, or a record player, using a mammoth's trunk as a shower, or a monkey's tail to set up the bowling pins. All of the Stone Age gadgets were very creative, and it was a big reason why the show stands out at a glance. However, there is much more substance to the show than the visuals. This is the same cartoon that has the classic Hanna-Barbera turnstile background animation after all. No, where this show really shines is with the character dynamics, mostly between Fred and Barney and Fred and Wilma. Those are the relationships which really matter on the show. Betty is sometimes there, but she's only ever really used as support to either Barney or Wilma. I think she has maybe 2 spotlight episodes about her in the entire 6-season run. A lot of the marriage bickering between Fred and Wilma clearly show that this was originally made as a cartoon sitcom for adults. Kids could get something from a scene like that too though. I am sure they would find some of Fred's grumbling and mumbling funny. Much like The Simpsons, this was a show which could be enjoyed by everyone really. That's what a lot of these episodes are. A fairly slow-paced story covering real-life situations. It may not always be crammed full of jokes, but it all helps to build a connection to the characters and the world they live in. And it's the little moments like Fred deciding for Barney that he doesn't want to buy the steak, which give you a real insight into their relationship. I don't want to sell it short though, because the show did experiment from time to time. The episode Alfred Brickrock Presents was a nice change of pace as a tribute to Alfred Hitchcock. I like that dark ending as it just reveals that the guy just casually fed his wife to this carnivorous bird. If that episode happened in a later season, it may well have come off as gimmicky, but season 2 still had that darker edge to it to make it feel meaningful. I guess I should also give out a selection of my favourite episodes from the show, which can serve as recommendations for anyone wanting to give this series a quick try, or if you've already seen this show, just to reminisce on the good old days. At the Races was one I enjoyed. Fred and Barney wanted to buy a pool hall, so they go and bet on the races to raise the money. After they end up losing, it turns into this big theatrical drama, where Fred and Barney try to convince Wilma that Fred was mugged. Yeah, Fred lying to Wilma to cover up his shenanigans is a very common dynamic on the show, but Wilma almost always catches him out in the end. An iconic moment from this episode was the line, "Don't bet on the races," by the owner of Sabretooth, who was a dinosaur Fred and Barney bet on. Another episode I want to highlight is The Gambler. Not only is it iconic for Fred's catchphrase that he keeps repeating throughout the episode, I feel the way it presented the issue of a gambling addiction was quite a bit ahead of its time. It treated Fred like a victim who needs help, instead of a deadbeat who deserves nothing but contempt. That's more of a modern way of looking at things, rather than the attitudes of that time. It was a clever way to do things, and the episode shows that you can recover from addictions and go on to live a happy life. Finally, to show that the Flintstones was capable of hitting the emotional moments as well, I also want to highlight the episode No Help Wanted. In this one, Fred actually starts to be a good friend to Barney and encourages him to take this job, but he soon has to repossess Fred's TV. And Barney gets kind of all emotional about this and doesn't want to do it, but soon remembers Fred's own advice which he gave him, So he goes through with it, and they end up getting into a scuffle over it. But it all does resolve in the end in a nice way. Again, it was another simple episode that really showed the rifts that can happen in a friendship in a clear way. Now, I'm not going to keep listing episodes forever, but I will point out some more classic moments from the series. Barney's goofy appearance on The Price is Right was funny as hell, as was the brief time he and Fred owned a boat together. And who could forget the classic Burger on a Bun song? This show wasn't known for its musical numbers, but it could pull out a banger from time to time. As you can now see on the screen, I've taken the liberty of compiling my top 20 episode list for the series, so if you're interested, have a look, and pick out any of these to give a watch. I don't think you'll regret it. Now I have come to the point of the video where I have to discuss how the show changed, and boy did it change massively over time. Halfway through season 3 was when they started the Pebbles arc. She was a baby girl brought in to try and bring in more viewers and merchandising opportunities for the show. Incidentally, this was the same time the show's sponsor changed from the infamous Winston cigarettes to a kid's jelly. On paper, these things seemed superficial to the actual standard of the show, but believe me, it did result in a serious tone shift. The Flintstones went from being a show for adults which kids could watch, to being a show for kids which adults could watch. I feel the show lost its more satirical dark edge on family life, in favour of more lovey-dovey moments involving Pebbles. I guess it would be tolerable if the show stopped it there, but it had no plans to do that. It kept introducing more characters. Season 4 added Bam Bam, another gimmicky baby character to play with Pebbles, and again it didn't help the show overall. But I do have to give credit to the episode that introduced him. It had some emotional moments between Barney and Betty, about wanting a child but not being able to conceive one, but in the end they are able to adopt Bam Bam. It was a good episode, just the follow-up to it wasn't as good as I would have liked. Season 5 continued this trend by giving the Rubbles a pet kangaroo-type creature called Hoppy to play with Dino. And Season 6 includes what many consider to be the show's real jump the shark moment, the arrival of a green alien called the Great Gazoo. Now, in fairness, I don't actually mind Gaz as a character. His dry wit can be funny at times, but he's just so far removed from what the show originally was that it's kind of a tough pill to swallow. I guess I should also mention that B. Benaderet left the show after season 4, so Jerry Johnson replaced her as Betty. She did a decent job, but again, it shows that there was a lot of things going on with the show behind the scenes during these years, most of it for the worst. By the time we got to seasons 5 and 6, most of the episodes were either poor imitations of old plot lines, or completely wacky farces, like the Hat Rocks and the Gruesomes. That episode is literally the writers putting gimmicky characters together and hoping for the best. These episodes, even when they got it right, always felt like they were missing something. The Dr. Sinister episode, for example, was probably the best out of these wacky episodes. I like how much of a farce it is, and the character Madam Yes, always going, "I'm too important to be captured." That was a decent funny episode, but the premise of it meant that it could never rise to the heights of the best of the series. I don't want to leave this series on a negative though, because even the worst seasons were still watchable. They weren't awful, just average, and there was always a few hidden gems to be found. Some of my favourite later season episodes include Moonlight and Maintenance, where Fred moves into a apartment building, only if he serves as its janitor, Indian Rockley's 500. I just love the running gag of that episode, that Fred drives like a guy driving home on the freeway from work. I also like the season 5 episode A Haunted House is Not a Home. That episode has a good atmosphere, with Wilma and Betty staying at home during a storm. Meanwhile, Fred and Barney are trying to survive a night in a haunted house in order to inherit it. When it was all revealed to be a joke, Fred flips out and takes his revenge. That was a great ending, I thought. It was totally understandable that Fred reacted that way, and the way he just pulls out this massive cleaver from nowhere is hilarious. Despite the odd good episode though, you could tell that the show was starting to lose steam, and that did show in the viewing figures. The last episode of the series to air was the story of Rocky's Raiders on April the 1st, 1966. Unfortunately, this was no April Fool's, this really was the end of the Flintstones. Of course, there were many spin-offs years later, like the Pebbles and Bam Bam show, the new Fred and Barney show, and even a live-action movie. None of them ever came close to being as good as the original though, in my opinion, and they certainly did not have the cultural impact. I think every primetime animated show today owes the Flintstones some thanks for paving the way. It was truly a special show, and one which I have always had a ton of respect for. I respect it for how it does the simple things well. It proves that just by putting characters you actually care about in relatable situations, whether it be relationship problems or work problems, you can have a classic show. Good animation and flashy sequences are a bonus, but are not a prerequisite. I think the Flintstones, above all else, proves story and more importantly characters trump the flashy stuff, and especially in the long term are the bread and butter of a show being successful and standing the test of time. To close off this video, I want to thank all of you who watched this retrospective and essay-like analysis, and please feel free to be nostalgic about this show all over the comments section. For now though, I'm all done. Take care.